And I'm joined by my colleagues, Danya Leebaw and Scott Marsalis. And modeling best practices in qualitative and theoretical research, I'm going to begin with a positionality statement. So we are all three managers in a large flagship research university library. We all three report to an associate university librarian for research, and each of us leads a department in our larger university library system. We oversee the work of librarians who are faculty-like and who work through a tenure and promotion process. And we are a non-union environment at the University of Minnesota where we all work. And we each bring other identities that vary among us in terms of age and background. And we also recognize that what we're discussing today may feel more or less applicable to your own circumstances. And so we really welcome your reflection on that during the session, thinking about how this might need to be adjusted for your own context and what may or may not translate well to your own library. Next slide. Going to share a little bit of, oops, one back, please, Danya, for the agenda. Okay, we're getting there. I'll pause for a moment.
Give me a minute, Erin.
Yeah, no
Sorry.
problem.
Okay. Let me share again. Um, okay.
Perfect. Great, thanks. So we're going to share a little bit of the history of the liaison model at the University of Minnesota, highlight a bit of the context for the change that we have experienced and how that led us to this work that we're doing now with our liaison model, overview our process that we took to do this review, talk a little bit about our recommendations, how we prioritize those recommendations, and our first steps towards implementation. We're going to do a little reflection by sharing some lessons learned and aha moments, and then really want to have as much of a rich conversation through questions and answers as we can at the end of the session. Next slide. So a little bit, I think it's really important to set the context and stage by talking about the work of the liaison model at the University of Minnesota. So I would say we were really early adopters and leaders of this model, very long-standing history of this, over 25 years, where librarians have been assigned to work with a particular discipline. We saw a bit of shift in the mid 20-teens where we started thinking about liaison responsibilities and functional specialist responsibilities. And we, through that process, started pairing those roles. So, for example, we had a liaison to the School of Public Health who also did data management. And so those dual roles became more common within our libraries. Um, we all lived through COVID. Post-COVID really prompted a kind of a reimagining of that liaison model and thinking about those functional specialists. And what we did in our libraries was kind of decouple those dual roles and create a separate department really focused on things like data management and publishing and research impact, bringing those together and separating out those dual roles. And here we are now in 2025, where we are experiencing some continued reduction of resourcing, which has prompted that reevaluation of the liaison model, really thinking and hoping that we could land in a place with greater sustainability over time. And I'm pointing this out because I think it's important to know that this longstanding nature of the liaison work at the University of Minnesota highlights the strengths that this model brought to our work because it really has been fit for function for a long time. And it really served as a great way to organize our work across what we think of our core liaison responsibilities, course integrated instruction, reference and consultations, collection development, and outreach. And this is important to say because a move away from this longstanding model it's not an easy change, right? It's something that really has required and continues to require thoughtful practices and approaches. And we'll be talking about those approaches in our presentation today. Next slide. And here's a bit of the context of change that we have experienced. And I'm guessing that you've had similar stories to tell at your own organizations. And in reflecting and preparing for this presentation, kind of found like two buckets of change. One was around 2020 to 2023. At our libraries, we welcomed a new dean. We all had the COVID shutdown and reopening. There was a retirement incentive offer where we saw about 800 years of experience walk out the door in about 2 months' time. So a huge shift in our workforce. There was a significant reorganization of our libraries. We had we all new senior leadership at the associate university librarian level, and a lot of st turnover and then hiring in that time. And there was a little bit of a respite, a little lull, and here we were in 2024, where we had been experiencing, of course, the changes to federal funding. That's really impacting us as a R1 institution, disruptions to higher education, budget reductions being felt by these and other changes, continued staff turnover paired with vacancies, and um, some, not always an opportunity to fill those vacancies. And I'll speak from our lens from living in the Twin Cities area of Minnesota, that we've also been experiencing significant social unrest, and I'm guessing that's not just our story, that other people have shared that story. So there's a social cultural context in which we are working and experiencing change as well. Next slide. And so again, so all of these changes, all of this work that we've been experiencing has really helped us kind of come to this place where, well, what has been so successful as a strong model for us in the past, what has been fit for function for a very long time, now in this current context of change is revealing some gaps. So both are good. So we're thinking about the liaison model and a team-based model. Both are good. Both have value. There's no good or bad here, right? So, but the liaison model, I think if you think about the strengths, on one hand, it really centers relationships. It recognizes expertise, allows us to be a little more responsive, maybe add a little bit more customization. On the other hand, there are some drawbacks. Perhaps there's unequal workloads, maybe duplicate work happening, a sense of isolation, maybe a bit of a decreased visibility into the workload. The team-based model also has lots of pros. On one hand, there's opportunity for shared growth and learning, shared workloads, a broader pool of strengths to draw from, greater insights into each other's works. And on the other hand, sometimes it's harder to recognize individual contributions. And this is a little bit important, important for us in terms of having a continuous appointment or promotion process that requires individual recognition. We also acknowledge that there might be some more administrative labor to a team-based model, perhaps an over-reliance on one person's strengths, and maybe more potential for conflicts. So in this work that we're doing, our hopeful goal is to reach a point where we have a balance between the two. What's good about the liaison model, what's good about the team-based model, in this current context that we're working in, and that we are able to be a little bit more nimble into the future so we can continue to shift and rebalance over time as changes come our way. Next slide. And setting the stage for this work around a review of the liaison model, we first started this work, I would say now, several years ago, and really focused on looking at what I'll call our capital S services, our research services, to really think about how do we actually understand what is the service, how do we right size those services, and how do we scope our work effectively in a place of reduced resources. And so this really focused in what we call our functional specialist roles that I had mentioned earlier, that like publishing, the systematic reviews, data management, and others, and how we could think about which services we could really support, and then how do we scope those works and make that scope of work really visible to our internal and external audiences. There's a lot of involved in this, including decision-making rubric for what actually is a service, and using that to define which services we could continue and which ones we had to sunset. And that work continues to play an important role in our day-to-day. As new projects may come to light, we really think about, well, is this sustainable? So this is really thinking about the services. And now we're going to be moving into what that then prompted, which is on our next slide, please. Our continued work with the liaison model, really recognizing that while we have these very core important services that align with our functional specialists, um, much of the work of our division falls outside of these formal services. And this is really that liaison work, that course integrated instructions, reference and consultations, collection development and outreach. And this is very important work. We want to really recognize that this is the kind of like the bread and butter of librarianship practice within our division. And want to share, really recognize that this work could also benefit from a similar review with the goal of adding scope and process improvements to mitigate those cons of the liaison model that were being felt more strongly with reduced resources. Next slide. Okay, so this is all your chance to come to this conversation, and we're going to prop a 1 minute reflection and going to ask for you to just chime in and chat. What is your driving interest in reshaping the liaison model in your organization? What's prompting you, or what are your driving factors that are making you interested in this work? Equitable workload, reorg, small teams, sustainability. Wow, lots of things. Budget and reduced staffing. I saw more unequal workload. Yeah, that's a common theme here. Um, wow, ditto, ditto. Fewer people, less staff, um, fewer staff, less staff, unequal workload, silos. Wow, lots to digest there, but it seems like we have a lot of um, themes happening. Interdisciplinary work, very interesting. Silos again. Too many hats per person. Yeah, we heard that a lot, and we'll be talking about that a little bit today as well. Yeah, more programs, no increase in staff, fewer people, smaller budget. Yeah, we'll keep those going. I think that this really just demonstrates that we're not alone in this work, and you are all not alone in this work. And so hopefully this kind of maybe is a start to a broader conversation that we all can have together. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Danya.
Great. Thank you so much, Erin. So this leads us to the project that we are here to share about today. Last summer, our associate university librarian, our boss, our AUL, charged Scott, Erin, and I, so all department directors, with a project to review our liaison model with an eye toward recommending a new approach. So we kind of knew what we were aiming for, but we were given the opportunity to do a deep dive. And so first, I'm going to walk through a bit of the charge, kind of the high level questions and deliverables that shaped our work today. And here is starting with the top lines of the project brief. The main goal was to characterize our current liaison model, to identify where we intersect with other parts of the libraries, and consider potential changes and recommend changes in light of the work of our division of the libraries and what we're responsible for providing. And then also be thinking about change management along the way. So we were asked to consider these questions. What is the typical workload? Like what does the current liaison model look like in practice? So what are liaisons' workload? How are responsibilities distributed among them? Are there ways that we could be working together that we just currently aren't or we haven't maybe thought about before? We were asked to hone in on like what are the kind of like that scale that Erin was talking about earlier or showed earlier. What are the benefits and drawbacks to our current model? If we do implement changes, what are some of those potential trade-offs? What might be gain? What might we lose? And then also always keeping in mind how our work is intersecting with other parts of the library. And again, keeping in mind change management the whole time. So there's some overlap with the other parts of the charge, a few redundancies here, but just to share, this is literally from the charge we were given. We were asked to look externally and look at what peer institutions might be doing with their liaison model. Again, to identify overlaps in our work, make recommendations, consider tools and technology that we might use, and also be involving the liaisons all along the way. So this timeline gives you a sense of just how much time, like just to kind of place this in, give you a sense of when we were working on this and how much time we had for each of the stages of the project, mostly just to give you a sense of scope and scale. Like this wasn't a multi-year long project. It also didn't happen within a few weeks. So we spent a few months looking internally, looking externally. We spent a lot of time developing a list of recommendations. And then we're currently right now in that future bucket, which is actually most likely going to extend for a long period of time. This is the time where we're reflecting on the recommendations with the other department heads that we work alongside with our liaisons, with our colleagues across the libraries, and we're beginning to operationalize some of our recommendations, and we'll talk quite a bit more about that. But that's kind of where we are in this process. So we're really we've moved along the way. We have some information that we want to share today, but we're also still somewhat in the middle of it. So starting with what you're looking at on the slide here is a set of guiding principles that we came up with together with the liaisons and other directors in the division to guide our work. So you might, from the brief, you can see we weren't explicitly asked to come up with guiding principles, but we were asked to think about change management. And from other experiences, the project that Erin referred to earlier, where we were looking at our services and sunsetting some of those, we knew that developing principles at the outset of a major project that's going to have a lot of change involved in it, that's an opportunity to bring impacted people along the way and to get their insight into what they care about and what they value too. And so briefly, our principles included aiming for probably some more consistency than we have right now across liaisons work, but also providing space for customization. So be consistent when you can, customize when it is meaningful. We also came up with a principle of affirming and investing in what is working. So this is to honor the fact that we're not changing everything. Some of what we're doing is working really well, and we're just going to kind of double down on that. Clarifying boundaries to strengthen relationships. So this comes from some other work and research that we've done, but recognizing that one of the best ways to collaborate and work with our colleagues is to actually get clear on what our scope of work is and what their scope of work is. So looking at that. Seeking balance. So we recognize that we're not probably going to go all or nothing. It's not, that's not the approach that we're looking for. We'll probably land somewhere with a nice, healthy balance, ideally. Sustaining forward movement. So despite one of the extremely challenging environment that we find ourselves in at our workplace and in higher ed, and we have been for years, it's tempting to just freeze in place, but we don't have an appetite for major changes, but we do want to keep momentum and adjust and implement minor and important changes along the way. We don't want to stop. We want to be a place that still innovates, that still does exciting, important work. And then lastly, to trust in ourselves, and that's us and our liaisons and our colleagues, that we have a really good sense of what our work entails, what we're trying to do, what our users want from us, and that is really important knowledge for us to draw on. So before we get into the details, this is kind of a big picture overview, and I just want to situate our work in context, which we did a little bit at the beginning, but specifically about the liaison. So just to emphasize we're at a really, really, really big public university. So that shapes a lot of what we're thinking about and what we need to do. We're at a really big research library. So you're probably wondering how many liaisons are we talking about? So we have about 35 liaisons. We have some vacancies. We have some there's shifts and changes all the time, but that's roughly our size. And there are other librarians who do in our organization who are doing all sorts of work that at your library might be handled just by liaisons. But I just want to be clear, like these are the individuals that this is the core work that they're assigned to do. This is the title that they wear. And our liaisons generally work across 4 core areas of responsibility. So they're doing instruction, mostly course integrated instruction. They're handling a lot of reference and consultation, so supporting researchers and students doing research. They have varying degrees of responsibility for collection development and then outreach. So the time spent in each of these areas varies, sometimes quite significantly across liaisons, but all of our liaisons generally are assigned this bucket of responsibilities. So to conduct an internal review, we kind of organized our thinking in those buckets, and that's going to guide what we now talk about. And just to quickly say, like, for this internal review, which is what I'm about to kind of go through, what did we learn about our own model as we did this work? We relied on a mix of inputs. So we gathered statistics of instruction and reference for all the liaisons. Our statistic keeping is really rough, I would say. It's not super reliable. So we took that all with a grain of salt. We looked for patterns. We kind of tried to take from it what we could. Separate issue, another conversation, but we did look at statistics, but we didn't really make decisions based on those. We had a lot of conversations with our liaisons. We had, all staff meetings. We talked in different departments. We also consulted with department heads from around the libraries. And then we reflected on our own knowledge of our practices. Scott and Erin and I all have a lot of experience supervising liaisons or being liaisons ourselves. And so we did draw on that. And a lot of this work was really just putting some structure and articulation around our practices. So that was, kind of organizing our thinking in that way was a lot of what we were doing. So kind of going through those buckets one by one, I'm just going to briefly share, what did we learn? What was our current model that we were asked to reflect on? And so for us, instruction was typically the requests were coming via email at the request of individual faculty members. So kind of a one-to-one request. Our liaisons develop a customized session for each request. I mean, they might repeat one over time if they're visiting a class a lot. And these are pretty customized. They're based on assignments, partnership with faculty. I imagine a lot of you have a similar instruction set up with your liaisons. At our library, liaisons are typically handling the advanced undergrad, so kind of subject-specific undergrad instruction and or graduate and professional education instruction. We have other staff in the libraries whose primary responsibility is for early undergraduate instruction and large programmatic instruction, such as supporting a writing program where we have over 100 sections that are working with a librarian in some capacity. That is a part from the liaison work. I think, the numbers, like I said, are a little shaky, but generally the range of instruction that librarians handle varies widely. So we might have liaisons doing just a handful of instruction sessions a year, and we have other liaisons who are teaching all the time. And really, this is very discipline dependent at the moment. And then LibGuide, we are increasingly investing in asynchronous tutorials and integration with Canvas and things like that. So that's a part of it too. So more interestingly probably is what analysis did we do of what's working and not working with our current model. So with our current model, what we really identified as the benefits, the instruction is highly customized, so it's really responsive to and respectful of individual faculty requests. And also the way that it currently works, librarians develop this this wonderful deep knowledge over time with the faculty and classes they work with, which really builds relationships and is highly valued by those faculty in those departments. However, because instruction is mostly happening in response to individual requests, um, librarians are reaching a lot of students where they are invited, but we have these gaps where librarians are not invited. Students in those classes don't get the benefit of that library instruction when they really might benefit from it. It's also really hard to get a handle on workload because it's all happening on this kind of one-to-one level for the most part. It's mostly happening via email. We just don't have a clear, easy way to move around and rebalance those requests. It's also incredibly challenging when we have vacancies because it's so customized, it's so individual that every single time we have a vacancy, it's a scramble, which is definitely something we want to move away from. Sorry, I'm just trying to go back here and I'm getting my Zoom tools. Um, there we go. Okay. So for instruction, currently instruction is highly customized and therefore really responsive to oh wait a minute, I'm sorry. I went too far back. I'm going to move on. Okay, reference and consultations. I lost my place. Okay, so reference and consultations. So how these are currently happening now is that we have a frontline reference service model. They're at desks and they handle chat reference and some form reference. They are typically the first point of contact for a lot of the reference that comes into our library. And then they are referring to our liaisons or, if they're not handling the questions themselves. So liaisons are getting reference questions in a number of ways. They're getting referrals from the service points frequently, and then they also might get individual reference requests or appointment requests via email or even online scheduling tools, which is varies. The use of those varies across our liaisons. So liaisons are handling those advanced questions. There's also just a huge range of reference types that our liaisons are handling. It's everything from simple and quick questions. You might think those all go to the frontline service points, but sometimes, people develop relationships and they're going directly to the liaison, all the way to lengthy, complex queries that might take days or weeks or months of back and forth for liaisons to answer. We have thousands of reference interactions in our statistics, and there is, maybe a median, again, not reliable, but a median of about 80 per liaison. But again, this is an area that really varies, with some liaisons having many more that is part of their workload and some having fewer. So as far as the benefits and drawbacks, for the users who are seeking out support, they're often making their way to a really knowledgeable librarian who's had a lot of time and energy developing that expertise in their discipline. Our users also have many ways to get help, which I know is something many of them appreciate. Our librarians are developing that expertise over time, which is important, and our librarians have a lot of autonomy in how they manage their reference and consultation service. It's really their own thing that they're managing right now. The drawbacks are because this is really reactive. It's offered on request. It's really unpredictable. And also, so again, the workload is hard for all of us to get a handle on. It's hard to shift. It's hard to rebalance amongst liaisons, even harder in some ways than instruction. And then we don't have centralized tools at this moment, where that's something we'll talk more about, other than, LibGuides and a few SpringShare products that help liaisons manage their reference and consultations. And then we also don't have a lot of opportunity built into our current model for liaisons to come together and share and norm with each other, not only about how they might handle different kinds of questions and share that knowledge, but also standards and practices. How long do you typically spend on this kind of a question? At what point do you kind of say, I can't find anything, I've got to be done? How quickly do you get back to people? Even things like that. Moving on to collection development. In this area, each department has someone that's designated as a lead in collections. The liaison role really varies across our disciplines and departments in this area, probably more so than some of the other areas. So, for example, in arts and humanities, our liaisons are spending quite a bit of time on collection development. And on the other hand, in some of our science disciplines, liaisons are spending very little time. It's mostly handled by the coordinator. We also have some distinct collections in our division that require expertise and skills. So even though our library has a special collections unit with a ton of wonderful collections and archives, in our area, we have liaisons and curators who are responsible for things like the map library, area studies libraries, historical medical libraries, and collections. And so that is in our area to manage and something that we think about. And then it's worth noting a lot of this work happens outside of our liaison area in the rest of the libraries. So, what we identified as the benefits and drawbacks to how we manage collections, we think we're doing a great job accommodating those that variety of disciplinary needs. We're not forcing a cookie cutter approach in collections. We're kind of accepting that it's okay that this looks different. And this is an area we've been tinkering with for a while now. We've actually implemented changes kind of incrementally over time in collections more than some of our other areas, which is good. Like we're already along the way where we want to be. The drawbacks, there's some real legacy paperwork challenges in this area based on how things used to be done. Like lots of little teeny tiny funds that have been there for years that we really want to kind of collapse and get a handle on. And then another issue that was really interesting to me that came up in our inquiry that we hadn't really talked a lot about previously is that as we've pulled collections back from many of our liaisons' core responsibilities and really centralize this work to some degree already, some of our early career liaisons in particular are missing out on that opportunity to learn about collections maybe in the way it used to happen through mentorship, through conversation, through making those decisions. And so that's something I think we're thinking about is how to balance that professional development and learning about collections without necessarily still having that core work. And then finally, with engagement and outreach, our liaisons are responsible for connecting with assigned departments and building relationships. They are that single point of contact, the definition of the liaison. And yet we do have a lot of other staff in the libraries that also handle a lot of outreach. So that's something just to note about our structure. This is an area where we have really pulled back in some ways because of our vacancies. It's an area that is like kind of the first to go when we are short-staffed. And that, that kind of shows up in the benefits and drawbacks, which is that we recognize that building relationships and sustaining those is really valuable. It makes the library relevant and accessible and helps us keep in touch with what our users care about and what they need and bring that back to the libraries. But it is like it's both a benefit and a challenge that it's really responsive to dialing up and dialing down depending on our staffing situation. But because of that, partly, it's really uneven across the libraries. So we might, again, because of vacancies, we might have departments that have a super strong relationship with their liaison. Their liaison has worked with them for many years. Everything's great. And then we have departments because of a vacancy or because of staffing shortages that we're just kind of babysitting, right? We get them what they need when they ask, but we haven't been able to invest in more outreach than that. So to summarize, this is kind of how we came to characterize our own liaison model as it currently stands. Our liaisons are there on their own, balancing a lot of spinning plates, like the image on this slide. So we think of it right now, how we're doing things is like one liaison to many departments, usually. it is highly autonomous, very individualized. Our liaisons have assigned departments, but beyond that, how they go about their work, they're kind of shaping their own everything, their own processes, their own goals, their own work in this area, which isn't good or bad. There's some positives to it and some challenges to it. It's pretty reactive to demand. We're mostly responding to the requests that we get. And then it's also the workload is just incredibly uneven and variable and hard for us to get out in front of. And that's all looking inward. We also engaged in a significant review of external models. So we looked at what are other librarians doing with their liaison model? How is it going for them? If they've made changes, why, and how have those played out? So we looked at literature and presentations. We also had a number of phone calls with librarians at other institutions who we knew had made changes to their liaison model or were planning that to kind of talk to them about what they did and why and how it's going. And we learned a lot from this part of the inquiry. I'm not going to go bucket by bucket or into as much detail, but just some highlights included like we are observing a lot of libraries moving from that one to many to the many to many. So many librarians supporting many departments. So that team-based model is definitely happening. Interestingly, the core work of liaisons is largely staying steady. That hasn't been changed as much. There's still the expectation that they'll be doing those buckets of work. We also saw a lot of hybrid approaches. We didn't see a lot of moving totally to team-based work and abandoning the liaison relationships or just sticking with what was happening. There's a lot of middle ground. We also have heard many libraries are reconsidering their liaison model. We saw that in the chat today. That was affirmed from our conversations. And we really just wanted to emphasize what we saw is like there's no single right approach. It's really that series of balancing and trade-offs. And I'm going to hand it over to Scott.
Thanks, Danya. So having gathered information, we then had developed a long list of recommendations, and we organized them into a list into various categories. So we had those four core areas of instruction, reference and consultation, collection, development, and outreach. But we also had recommendations around how to manage change and how to shift our culture, around tools and technology, and then also around staffing. Next slide, please. So around instruction, and I should say, um, in developing our list, we did not prioritize because we wanted to bring them back to all of the directors in our research service area to prioritize together because our list was quite lengthy. We knew we could not achieve them all right away. And then, so I'll be just like sharing highlights and not getting too granular, but this kind of summarizes our main kind of themes and also just wanted to give you a sense of the types of things that recommendations that we developed. So around instruction, we really want to focus on cross training so that workloads could be shared and equalized. One of the big motivators for myself at least was that because I couldn't really see below the surface, I had one librarian who, was not telling me that she was feeling overwhelmed, but her colleagues were. And so we needed to develop a way to help um, equalize the workload, especially around instruction and reference. Um, we recommend some kind of shared calendaring to allow workload sharing to be easier to accomplish, and then also to make it a little bit more visible to me as the director or to the other directors. We needed to implement a form that we designed, not coming out of another area of the libraries, to gather the information that we need to do instruction, but also then to communicate to the requester what our parameters are, which include things like how much lead time we need to reasonably take on a class, and what the parameters of instruction are that we are willing to take on. And then we needed to build a rubric to facilitate the prioritization of requests when they come in and to clarify again to scope so that when a request comes in, we can look at the rubric and work through to see if it's something that we have to say no to, or if it's something that we can accommodate. And then we wanted to build repositories where instruction materials can be shared. I'm sure my experience isn't unique where I am watching one of my colleagues instruct, and I'm like, that's a fantastic slide. I just want to steal that and use it in one of my future presentations. Next, please. So around reference and consultation, one of the things that we strongly recommended is that we need to normalize response times and document our expectations. We have some people who a request comes in at 8 o'clock on a Sunday night and they feel obligated to respond immediately. And others say, I will get back to you in 3 business days. And so what is our norm? And how do we make sure we communicate that to our staffs as well? We need to similarly share parameters around the time spent on questions or consultations and how many consultations is sustainable. And then encouraging team-based coverage and centralized email addresses. This has multiple advantages. Again, equalizing workload. And it also, it helps when we do have turnover between librarians or when we need to maybe balance where what departments are served by what liaisons. But it also helps us in developing a culture of safety if email addresses are not personal. We do unfortunately have bad actors out there who target some of our people who are working in maybe more politically sensitive areas. And then we need strongly encourage the use of office hours and booking software. So we are a Google suite operation, and so it's really easy to say what are your office hours, and then set up a form and create a shortened link that I pop it into my email signature, and then when people want to book a consultation for me, we don't have to go through the back and forth of when can I meet with you? Sure. When are you available? And emails that take 4 days to schedule an appointment. And then we need to implement some cross-departmental teams where needed. So, for example, we are piloting a cross-departmental team covering the education and behavioral mental health departments. Next slide, please. Around collection development, again, we needed to recognize that the arts and humanities have different needs than the sciences and social sciences, by the nature of research methodologies, as well as reliance on monographic type works. In those areas that had very complex fund structures for one-time purchases, that we needed to collapse them to ease management. A lot of these were vestiges of like the bibliographer model, where they liaison felt they needed to be able to tell every program exactly how much they spent on that program for their reaccreditation processes. And collections are just much more complex than that old model. Um, and we needed to reduce time waste and fund waste through more frequent uses of analysis, whether that be use analysis broadly and more complex than just like checkouts. And then better promotion of the resources that we do subscribe to or own so that they do get used. And then we need to consider just eliminating one time, just in case purchasing altogether in the sciences and social sciences. Next slide, please. Around outreach, we really needed to think about reinventing or rethinking the way we do outreach. So the old model is so often um, almost like a sales model where we're trying to generate requests to get not only because we want to integrate, but to get numbers up, right? And that's how we demonstrate value is our numbers going up, kind of a capitalist model that we reject at this time. And we need to open space in people's work week in order to do some deep thinking and to do their professional development as well. So, really moving to a model that's about building relationships with departments rather than selling our services to them. Next slide. So, around change management and culture, again, one of the big needs is shifting our culture from autonomy to team-based, and creating a culture of healthy work hygiene. And so, expected there to be a lot of pushback on this. What I actually we're finding is that it's often very being embraced very happily and readily by our liaisons who are by being part of the process, they are finding it a way to be creative and to think about the best ways to do things. Um, by norming what we're willing to do and not do, we're helping individuals see that what they maybe think is like a high service model has a negative impact on their colleagues by setting unreasonable precedents. So by having a norm that can help everyone. Um, and say we need to really think about metrics if we're not just doing, purely quantitative. Um, and there's impacts on our promotion and tenure or continuous appointment process. So how are people going to demonstrate their impact and how they describe their work? And so we have to think about that as well. Next slide, please. Around tools and technology, when we were given the our charge, um, they recognized that we might have to invest in tools in order to achieve what we need to do. So, for example, a scheduling tool might be necessary, whether or can we just use the Google Suite around for those who are doing a team-based model. We have a couple of models that we have identified. One is using a ticketing system. We do have one through the university that we could implement. However, the way it's set up, anybody who uses that ticketing system can see the tickets for every other team. And we have concerns about confidentiality around that. And also, it doesn't, we're also use Spring Share and it doesn't talk across systems. So that would have to be resolved. So we're using right now delegated emails. So again, those team email addresses. And then if you're a member of that team, you add that to your suite. And when it's your week to cover the emails coming in and triage, you can just very easily see those. Using Google Drive for sharing of instruction materials. And again, thinking about what shifting your culture from necessarily an individual email address and a name to more team contacts. And next slide, please. Um, Around staffing, one of our big questions is triage. Some departments might have library assistants who work could accommodate doing some triage, but others don't. And so a model where rotating coverage of the email or monitoring an email address week by week might be a better model. Um, and we might have to do some larger reassignment of responsibilities to balance workloads. People might need to be on more than one team, for example. And then we have to think about uh, how do we need to rewrite our position descriptions when you don't have a one-to-one model for liaison work. Danya, I think you are, or is it Erin?
Yeah, I think I'll chime in since we're running short on time, which is My fault, I'm sure, for talking too long in my section. Instead of doing the 1 minute reflection, if please share in the chat. We'd love to hear of recommendations and how those resonate with you. And then I'm just going to wrap up with kind of where are we right now? And so what we have done, we have not rolled out most of these recommendations, actually. We're just slowly sharing them with the liaisons. We're moving really quite slowly, which is part of the change management very intentionally. So the department heads and directors have kind of spent some time reviewing recommendations and prioritizing. And so given that we kind of wrapped up that first part of the work in the middle of the school year, we just identified a few to focus on right away. And then we're going to kind of continue to just take these in kind of chunks as we go. We're not rushing into it. So what we've done already is we have piloted kind of a team-based, like a small team that hadn't been even in the same department before, of our liaisons who support the behavioral sciences, and kind of gave them a charge of identifying some ways that they can work together. Again, in the interest of time, I won't go into what they've already done, but it's been really fantastic actually already. We've done some lightweight information sharing, so some drop-in sessions on business information, which was one we prioritized because that's an information genre that is challenging for a lot of liaisons and shows up all over the university. And then we're also investigating a form for instruction intake and thinking about rolling that out likely this upcoming fall semester. So that's what we've done. Um, and again, please share your thoughts and takeaways. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen and we'll get to questions because I can see there are a lot of them in the Q&A, probably more than we can answer, but we can start to go through that all. So thank you all for that. And Erin and Scott, if you want to join and kind of help tackle some of these questions. And I will just start to go through these. So we have a question about how and from whom we got input when we defined our services. Um, I think that might be referring to the first project that we worked on, but that the Defining Research Services project. But that was, again, just input from people throughout the libraries, some of the people that use the services on campus. I don't know, Erin, if you wanted to add anything to that. Oh, I think you're muted.
I feel like in the interest of time, I think that there's a lot of questions around change management, Danya, and I think that
Yeah.
that might be beneficial to this group as well.
Yeah, that's great.
So I might get us started here. One of the reflections that we were going to share is that, change management really works, and taking it slow, if you have the luxury of taking it slow, really is helpful. And I think central to that has been sort of our guiding principles that have kind of held us accountable to the work at a very high level. And part of that was like trusting in ourselves, right? So I do think, one thing that we've always done through the previous project and this is like, how do we have people who are touching the work have some voice in the conversation, and especially the ones that are most directly impacted. I think that has been really helpful with change management, and it helps, I think, give a voice and empowers people to do the work in a way that is meaningful to them. The other thing that we'll just say is, I will add to that, is that those small, meaningful changes are important. So I'll give credit to my associate director, Lisa, that she always reminds me that small change is still change. And these small incremental changes over time are actually will lead to a tipping point. And so small change, not all small change is incremental. So how do you kind of do a steady drumbeat, knowing that at some point you're going to hit a culture shift? And it's the steady work that helps you get to that point that makes it a little bit more palatable than a maybe really big change all of a sudden. So those are things I would add. And I don't know if you want to add more, Danya or Scott, to that question.
Yeah, thank you, Erin, for I accidentally skipped this very
No
important slide
problem.
at the end in the
Well,
as I saw the questions piling up in the
yeah,
Q&A. So thank you for taking us back to that.
sure.
So I pulled up that slide again where we had written that down, and hopefully does address a bunch of those change management questions.
Yeah. And there was a one about communicating with faculty into departments, and if anyone else wants to take the lead there.
Uh, I would say that because as far as the communication, we've not done a lot of that yet because we actually haven't rolled out. I can't think of anything that would actually even be felt yet by the faculty and departments that we're working with. So pretty much all that we've done so far is have a lot of discussion and review and then pilot some of these internal facing projects. So that is still TBD, I think, and probably our biggest hurdle ahead will be this fall with the instruction form, which we are thinking about ways to communicate that via our website. And then we'll have to probably work with our liaisons to share some messaging.
Yeah. And the one thing I'll add to that is that to our benefit, we are not the only people going through significant change at our university. Many other departments are doing this, and so as we are rolling out maybe more significant changes, it is in a context of greater change and shifting priorities and resourcing across the university. So I think it's better understood in that larger context when we are having to announce these shifts. So just want to add that.
Yeah, and I think there, again, haven't had really the time or capacity to do like a wholesale communication. But where we are piloting it, it can be as simple as, by shifting to a group email address, um, you know, um, using that on LibGuides. Health Sciences Library has already done that. Um, sending responses from, putting the whole team's emails on that or names on that. So doesn't have to be an announcement so much as sometimes just a functional change.
There's one
Yeah,
more.
I
Oops,
yeah.
sorry,
Go
Danya.
ahead, Erin. Yep.
Oh, I was gonna say the one other question is I think that might benefit this larger group is a matter of scale, right? So we are at a very large institution. We have different resourcing than others, but I would say a lot of the components, Danya brought us through this process. She's led it really well. But like starting with these guiding principles, that has been very useful doing that work to kind of do that environmental scan, maybe talking to peers who are in this other similar situation. I feel like the piece parts all could fit together to tell that story for your own context in a meaningful way. Even if the scale is different, the process I think could be transferred quite nicely.
Yeah. That might be all that we have time for. I think I do just want to say, like, our liaisons so far, we have brought them in frequently, and this process has been fed by them as well. And so I have been so pleased and surprised in some ways that we have. I think we've actually reached a place, I don't want to jinx it, where our liaisons are genuinely excited and feel are not upset or frightened by this process, and that feels like probably the most important thing. And I'm sure part of that is because we've had the luck of kind of taking this slowly, but that has been incredibly important too.
Right. I think that we are at time, but that was a wonderful closing statement, I think. And thanks you to our speakers for answering these questions, for the great presentation. I feel like this conversation could go on for another hour. It's a really important conversation. So thank you for having that. So it was a pleasure to have you with us. Before we close the session, I would like to point out the evaluation survey that is available for you to complete. It is available both through the SCAD and when the Zoom closes. I'm certain the presenters would very much appreciate your feedback. Thank you all for attending, and we hope you enjoyed this presentation.